They say that in Seoul, the city never sleeps, but there are hours the city forgets. Hours when even the neon loses its color and the wind carries no scent. Between 2 and 3 in the morning, the streets turn hollow. The hum of machines falters and time stops pretending to move. If you ever find yourself walking past a convenience store at that hour, its fluorescent lights humming faintly in the fog, do not look inside. And if you do not wave at whoever waves back. The story, as told by an old reporter from a minor Seoul paper, was never printed. He said the editor refused, not because it wasn't interesting, but because the paper jammed every time he tried to run the copy. They said it was cursed ink or a corrupted file. But those who read the draft before it vanished swore it wasn't fiction. It began on a street that still exists, though it changes names on maps. Locals call it Samil-ro, a place where 3 small alleys meet before bending toward the Han River. There, between an abandoned laundromat and a silent tailor shop, stands a narrow convenience store that opens 24 hours a day. The sign above its door flickers, the letters half burnt, half forgotten. Some nights it glows green, others blue. But on the nights of the new moon, it glows white, too white, as if lit from within by something that remembers the sun but refuses to rise again. The store was registered under many names. Records changed every year. Owners disappeared, but the place never closed. People said it was built on reclaimed ground, that beneath it lay an old stream once used to send offerings downstream to restless spirits. Back when Seoul was still a city of shadows and wooden homes, merchants would leave food by the water for the ones who walk without footprints. They called it Mujingang, the invisible current. When the new subway lines carved through that district, the current was sealed in concrete. And yet strange things began to happen. Dogs refused to walk past the store. The cameras above the door flickered endlessly between black and white. And every morning, around 3:15, the register would print a receipt with no barcode, no total, and no name. Just a faint message, always the same. Paid in full. The night clerk then was a man named Han Ji-won. He worked quietly, like someone trying to disappear without leaving a sound. Most said he was a student once, who failed his exams and stopped going home. He was the kind of person you'd pass without remembering, and yet the kind who remembers everything. He worked the night shift for 6 months, never missing a day. But in his final week, he began to speak differently. He told his manager that the customers were strange, not rude, not dangerous, just quiet, too quiet. He said they never touched the door. He said they always left the same way they came, in silence, with no footprints on the wet floor and no sound of the door chime. But the register would ring, and the receipt would print, always with that message, paid in full. At first, everyone thought he was joking, or maybe lonely. But then the CCTV went missing, and so did Ji-won. They found his uniform folded neatly by the back door, beside a still warm cup of instant coffee. The chair he sat in was empty, the receipt still printing over and over, as if the machine was trapped in a loop. Each slip of paper falling to the floor like the memory of a transaction that never happened. The old reporter said the police came, of course. They questioned everyone, searched the building, and found nothing. No signs of struggle, no blood, no fingerprints. Just a faint scent of incense, the kind burned during Yesa, the ancestral rite. And on the counter beneath the glass, a small note was pressed under a coin. It read simply, "They paid in full. Now it's my turn." For years, the story faded. The shop changed workers, changed lights, changed suppliers. But the hour between 2 and 3 remained strange. Sometimes travelers on late buses claimed they saw a figure standing inside the store, unmoving, facing the shelves as if reading invisible labels. Others said the lights flickered not because of faulty wiring, but because something moved between the bulbs in the air. Something thin, something waiting. Those who lived nearby began to whisper again, the way the elderly whisper before closing their doors. They said the store was never for people. It was built for debts, for transactions unfinished, promises unkept, griefs unspoken. Every soul that wandered too long in regret could come to that counter between 2 and 3 in the morning and buy what they had lost. But what they paid with, no one ever saw. Some said the price was memory. Others said it was breath. And a few believed the storekeeper himself was not entirely alive. That the reason the job never stayed filled was because each clerk eventually became part of the inventory. In Seoul, such stories survive like old bruises on the city's skin. They hide beneath the steel and glass, in the rhythm of escalators, the hum of vending machines, the neon that never blinks in time. The city has its own rituals, though it denies them, and the brightest lights often hide the darkest bargains. So if you ever pass a 24-hour store in a lonely alley, where no one else seems to walk, where the air feels thick though no rain has fallen, look for the sign above the door. If one of its letters burns white while the rest stay dim, turn around, because that's when the store is open for the ones who don't breathe anymore. And if you hear the soft whir of a receipt printing inside, whatever you do, don't take it. Seoul was built upon layers of itself, like a city that refused to forget what it once was. Beneath the glass towers and the subway veins lies a quiet sediment of time, where old water still remembers the dead. Every district has its ghost, but only a few are still fed. Samil-ro was one of them. In the old days, before the river was straightened and tamed, there was a stream running beneath that street. It carried the ashes of incense, the scraps of rice cake left for wandering souls, and sometimes things that were not meant to float. People said that on certain nights, when the moon hid its face, the stream would whisper names back to those who had spoken them aloud. If you heard your own, you were never to answer, for it meant your offering had been accepted and your debt was due. When the store was built over that sealed stream, the flow of offerings was cut, but the hunger remained. Old women in the nearby apartments still left bowls of water on their balconies during the summer rains. They said it was for the ones who come thirsty. Children were told not to look into puddles after dark. Taxi drivers refused to take late-night calls near the 3 alleys. And yet, the store stayed open, always lit, always humming, as if the current below still powered its veins. There was an old saying among the delivery men who worked the night route: "The city doesn't sleep, it just closes its eyes between 2 and 3. It was at that hour they'd avoid the store, circling the block twice before continuing. They said sometimes they saw shadows moving through the frosted glass, even when no one was inside. And sometimes when their tires rolled over the storm drain nearby, the air turned colder, smelling faintly of wet paper and burned sugar. Those who were new to the route often ignored the warnings, but after their first month, they all learned to look away." One such driver, Park Sun-woo, once spoke to a local TV crew in 2006. He said that on the night of a heavy summer rain, his van broke down right in front of the store. He went inside to use the phone. This was before smartphones were common, and saw the clerk standing motionless behind the counter, his eyes unfocused. Sun-woo asked if he could make a call, but the man didn't move. So he reached for the receiver himself, and that's when he noticed the receipts. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe, filling the counter, spilling onto the floor, the same line printed on each: paid in full. When he looked back, the clerk was gone, but the phone line, though dead, carried the faint hum of something breathing, not through the earpiece, through the cord, as if the call had already been answered from the other side. The TV crew never aired the segment. They said the footage glitched, frames frozen, eyes blurred, voices replaced by static. When they reviewed it, they realized the timestamp read 2:43 a.m., though they'd finished filming long before that. The tape was locked away, and Sunwoo moved to Busan soon after. He refused to talk about it again, but traces of that forgotten stream kept appearing. Sometimes after storms, the manholes nearby would fill with a thin, milky water that smelled faintly of burning incense. Fish were never found in it, only feathers, sometimes hair. An old monk from a nearby temple claimed that the water was borrowed, that it flowed not toward the sea but back into memory. He said Seoul had too many ghosts with nowhere to go. When offerings stopped, they began trading among themselves. What they traded, no one could say. Only that every trade required a witness. And perhaps that was why the store still had clerks. The folklore of Seoul is quieter than its lights. It hides in the cracks between technology and belief. There is a ritual few remember now, Banje Sijak, the midnight purchase. In older times, vendors would leave their stalls open after midnight, selling food not to customers, but to wandering spirits, so that they might eat and leave the living alone. It was not a superstition, but a transaction. The spirits would pay in small ways, a whisper of luck, a softened grief, a night without nightmare. But if the vendor refused to serve, the debt reversed. The merchant would find their own name written on the next morning's ledger under the column titled Unsettled. Some believe the modern convenience store at Samil-ro was a continuation of that rite, a ghost shop for unfinished business, operating through electricity instead of candlelight. But where offerings were once made with rice and wine, now they were paid with data, with presence, with the act of being seen. And so, the store became a shrine disguised as commerce. The cash register, a confessional, the barcode scanner, an eye that weighed the living and the dead alike. Residents of the district recall hearing faint bells at exactly 2:17 every night. Not the store chime, but something lower, older, as if rung underwater. Street cats would vanish for hours. Dogs would whine at locked doors. And on foggy mornings, if you look closely, the pavement outside the store would glisten, not from rain, but from moisture rising upward, as if the ground itself were exhaling. The store was cleaned every day, yet dust gathered faster there than anywhere else. The owner once told a reporter that the shelves sometimes rearranged themselves overnight. Cans moved, bottles aligned, dates reset. He said it was probably due to vibration from the subway beneath, but the subway didn't run at that hour. And when technicians checked, they found no lines passing under the building. Just concrete, then a hollow, an air pocket where no air should be. Those who lived long enough in Seoul knew better than to question such things. The city was full of pockets, places where time refused to behave, where echoes lingered longer than sound, where the dead were not so much gone as misfiled. The store at Samil-ro was one of those pockets, and between 2 and 3, the pocket opened. That was the hour the receipts printed without command. The hour when payment was not measured in money, and the hour when the living, if they lingered too long, could accidentally purchase their own absence. The last surviving clerk before Ji-won once wrote in his resignation letter, "I do not know what they buy, but I can feel what they take." It's like standing in front of a mirror that forgets your reflection, one piece at a time. He left the city soon after. The letter was found years later, pressed between the pages of a used paperback sold at the store itself. No one could explain how it got there, and still the lights hum, still the shelves shine, Still, the register waits. Because in Seoul, every transaction must end with balance. And sometimes balance requires more than numbers. Sometimes it requires a witness. The old stream beneath the store no longer flows, but every night, between 2 and 3, the air above it ripples, as though something unseen is still trying to pay what the living owe. His name was Han Ji-won, though no one called him that anymore. The few who knew him from university remembered a quiet boy who sat in the back of the lecture hall, who wrote his notes in pencil, who left before the applause. After his father's passing, he stopped attending classes. The reasons were whispered: debts, grief, or perhaps just exhaustion. He began working nights because nights asked fewer questions. The convenience store at Samil-ro was his 5th job in a year. He arrived without a resume, just a folded note of recommendation from a friend of a friend. The manager didn't care. Night clerks were cheap, and no one else wanted the shift. He started the following evening. From the beginning, Ji-won felt the silence. It wasn't the usual quiet of night work, where the hum of refrigerators and streetlights filled the air. This was different. It was as though the sound had weight, as though it pressed against his chest, flattening every breath. When he stood behind the counter, he sometimes felt the ground beneath the tiles, moving. A faint, pulsing rhythm, like water trapped beneath glass. The first customers seemed ordinary enough. Students buying cigarettes, taxi drivers grabbing instant noodles, office workers seeking warmth in the fluorescent haze. But after a week, Ji-won began noticing patterns. Some faces appeared every night, though they never spoke. Some hands left no condensation on the plastic bottles they held, and some eyes reflected no light at all. He thought he was tired. He tried coffee, music, prayer, but the faces didn't go away. They came between 2 and 3, always the same hour. Always the same silence. One woman in particular stood out. She wore a thin white blouse, though it was winter, and her hair fell over her face like wet threads. She carried a single item, a pack of matches. When she placed it on the counter, the register beeped, though Ji-won hadn't scanned anything. The receipt printed by itself. He glanced down. There was no barcode, no total, no store name, just those 3 words, paid in full. When he looked up, the woman was gone. No door chime, no sound. Only the faint smell of rain and smoke. He tore the receipt from the machine and stared at it. The paper was cold. Not cool. Cold, as though it had been resting inside a refrigerator. He tried tearing it in half, but the edges wouldn't separate. They folded instead, like damp cloth. He threw it away. The next night, it was back on the counter. By the 3rd week, Ji-won began hearing things. The soft click of buttons pressed when his hands were still. The faint rustle of plastic bags moving on their own. And sometimes a whisper from the aisle behind him. He could never make out the words. They came and went with the hum of the lights, like static breathing. He told himself he was hallucinating. But then came the night of the thunderstorm. Rain fell like shattering glass that evening. The streets were empty. At exactly 2:12 a.m., the lights flickered. The glass door slid open by itself, and 6 figures stepped inside. They moved slowly, in perfect silence, as though their feet never touched the floor. Their faces were blurred by the dim light, their clothes colorless, their hands carrying items that glowed faintly. A can, a flower, a child's shoe. Ji-won stood frozen. The register came to life without touch. One by one, the receipts began printing. Not 1, not 10, but hundreds. Each one with the same phrase, the same mark, the same invisible barcode. He tried to call the manager. The phone gave only static, and beneath it, a faint sound, like someone breathing underwater. He dropped the receiver. When he looked up again, the figures were gone, but the floor was wet, and the smell of incense filled the air. That night, Jiwon didn't go home. He stayed until dawn, sweeping the same corner over and over. The mop left streaks that didn't dry. When morning came, the receipts were gone, as if the night had swallowed its own evidence. In the days that followed, Jiwon grew pale. His reflection began to fade in the store mirror. At first it was faint, a blur where his face should be. Then one night, there was nothing at all, only the empty counter, and behind it, a shape that looked almost like him, but not quite. He started writing in a small notebook, recording the time and nature of each visit. He called it the second inventory. The entries were methodical, almost devotional. 2:01 a.m. One woman, no reflection. Purchased water. 2:17 a.m. Child's laughter, no customer. Receipt printed. 2:44 a.m. Man with no shadow. Requested lighter. Paid in full. The handwriting grew weaker toward the end. The final entry read, "If they are buying what does not exist, what am I selling?" After that, there were no more notes. But those who later worked the same shift noticed changes. Sometimes the scanner would activate on its own, sending out a red line that flickered across empty air. Sometimes the register would print a single receipt folded neatly beside the coffee machine. And sometimes the reflection of the counter in the front glass showed a clerk still standing there, long after the new worker had gone home. The CCTV footage of Jiwon's last shift was said to have survived. It circulated briefly among employees before disappearing. In it, Jiwon stands behind the counter, unmoving. The timestamp reads 2:03 a.m. For several minutes, nothing happens. Then slowly, the shelves begin to tremble. Items shift. Cans roll. Bottles tilt as if pushed by unseen hands. The fluorescent lights buzz violently. Jiwon looks up directly into the camera and smiles. Not wide, just enough to show that he's understood something the rest never will. Then the screen cuts to black. After that night, no one saw him again. But employees reported that every now and then, during the quietest hour, they would feel someone standing just behind them, close enough to smell burnt coffee, close enough to hear the faint rustle of paper. When they turned, the counter was empty, but a single receipt would be waiting, still warm from the printer, marked with those three words that never changed. Paid in full. In Seoul, where light bleeds into shadow without ever truly ending, there are debts that no currency can settle, and sometimes the clerk who takes the payment becomes the price. The night the reporter returned to Samil-ro, the air was colder than it should have been. It was late autumn then. Rain without wind, fog without shape. He had heard rumors that a new clerk had taken the night shift. Young, restless, unafraid, and like all who came before him, he didn't believe. The reporter came to the store at 1:58 a.m., notebook in hand. The street was empty except for a single cat sitting on the curb, staring into the glass door. Its reflection didn't move. When he stepped closer, the smell of electricity thickened. Ozone mixed with dust and something faintly sweet, like old incense. Inside, the lights flickered with a pulse not their own. The young clerk nodded politely, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. He said the power had been unstable all week. The reporter asked if strange things still happened. The clerk laughed softly. "Only when it's quiet," he said, "between 2 and 3. The reporter waited. He noted the time, 2:07. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, blurring the world into pale gray. The hum of the refrigerator deepened, almost like a voice drawing breath. Then the register clicked. No one had touched it. The display blinked once, twice, then printed a receipt. The clerk frowned, tearing it from the machine. There was no purchase recorded, only 3 words, the same that haunted every telling: paid in full. A second receipt followed, then a third. Soon the printer whirred in a steady rhythm, spitting out paper like falling snow. The reporter lifted his camera. The lens fogged immediately, as if the air itself didn't want to be remembered. Something moved at the edge of the frame, a shadow in the aisle, slender, deliberate, then another. Figures began to appear between the shelves, half seen in the flickering light. They didn't enter, they emerged, from the air, from the places where reflection should be. Their faces were not faces, only the suggestion of where faces used to be. And in their hands, each carried an object that seemed wrong. A rusted key, a cracked phone, a tooth wrapped in ribbon. Objects that once belonged to someone, somewhere, now offered back as currency. The clerk's voice broke the silence. "They're early tonight." He didn't sound afraid. He sounded resigned, like someone remembering an appointment long delayed. The reporter tried to speak, but his voice wouldn't rise. The air grew thick, pressing into his lungs. The receipts piled higher, curling at the edges as though burned by invisible heat. The printer smoked. Still it printed. Still it said the same thing. Paid in full, paid in full, paid in full. One of the figures approached the counter. Its hand was translucent, its nails like wet glass. It placed something on the counter, something that glimmered faintly in the light. The clerk froze. It was his own employee badge. The name on it was Han Ji-won. The reporter stepped back, trembling. The fog outside pressed closer, sealing the glass door with a pale film. The fluorescent light screamed. Every bulb burst at once. Darkness fell, not complete, but liquid, like ink spreading through water. The only light came from the register, still glowing faintly green. The clerk looked at the badge, then at the figure, and in that moment, his face changed. Not in shape, but in age. The years folded over him like dust settling on forgotten shelves. His eyes hollowed. His breath slowed. He turned to the reporter and whispered, barely audible through the growing hum, "It's a shift." That's all it ever was. Then he pressed the total key. The sound that followed was not mechanical. It was a sigh, ancient, heavy, unending, the kind that comes when debt meets balance. The light flared once, white and endless, swallowing everything. When the reporter woke, it was morning. The store was open, bright, ordinary. People came and went. The clerk behind the counter smiled, asked if he needed anything. There were no receipts on the floor, no fog on the glass. But when the reporter looked closer at the name tag, his stomach turned. The letters were faint, fading, but still legible. Han Ji-won. He asked if the clerk had worked there long. The man smiled. "As long as the lights stay on." The reporter left without buying anything. Outside, he looked down at his hand. A slip of paper clung to his palm. He hadn't taken it. He hadn't even touched the counter. Yet it was there, thin, damp, inkless. When the wind passed through, faint words shimmered across it. Paid in full. He tried to throw it away, but it stuck to his skin. He rubbed harder. The paper vanished, and yet the warmth remained, like the lingering pulse of a handshake. That night he dreamed of standing behind the counter. The shelves stretched endlessly into shadow. Customers came, silent, one after another. Each laid something before him, a memory, a photograph, a fragment of laughter. Each time he pressed the button, the receipt printed. Each time the same phrase, paid in full. When he awoke, the smell of incense hung in his room. His notebook was open beside him. A new page had been filled in unfamiliar handwriting. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m. The note said only, "Inventory complete, clerk transferred." He never returned to the store. He never published the story. But those who later handled his belongings said that every blank sheet of paper he owned began to yellow from the edges inward, as though slowly burned by invisible heat. And in the bottom drawer of his desk, they found a single receipt, unmarked, unstamped, but faintly warm to the touch. When held against the light, 3 words appeared, fading like breath on glass. Paid in full. The city of Seoul continued to hum. The trains still ran. The lights still burned. But beneath that constant pulse, something older stirred. A current without water, a debt without end. And somewhere in the half hour the city forgets to count, a small convenience store waits, its sign flickering pale white, its door sliding open to no one, its counter empty, except for the steady sound of paper printing itself into silence. Some debts are not written in numbers. Some payments do not require coin. They exist in the pauses, between a breath and a sigh, between closing time and dawn. Weeks passed after the reporter vanished from his usual routes. His colleagues thought he'd taken leave. His editor said he'd burned out again. But the last GPS ping from his phone was from Samil-ro, 2:48 a.m., the night he claimed he was just getting one last quote. The convenience store stood there still, 24 hours, lights on, nothing strange to the untrained eye. But the building opposite told a different story. A small laundromat had closed that same week, citing electrical interference. Locals whispered that the machines had started turning by themselves at night, as though someone invisible was washing the stains off their hands. A delivery driver who passed the store at dawn claimed he once saw 2 clerks behind the counter. One was a man, the other his reflection, both smiling, neither moving. Inside, the shelves changed subtly. Products appeared that weren't on any supplier's list. Brands discontinued decades ago. Cigarettes without barcodes. Milk cartons with expiration dates from the 1990s. An umbrella with dust on its handle, though it was brand new. The receipts still printed normally, except once in a while, a customer would find 3 faint words stamped across the bottom. Paid in full. Most tore it off and threw it away. Some pocketed it for luck. And a few, just a few, never came back. That was the pattern the city began to learn, but never name. Some places eat light, not lives. Some memories refuse to die because the world still owes them attention. Years later, a small fire broke out in the same district. Electrical, they said. The firefighters entered through the back alley, hoses in hand. When they reached the store, everything was already gone. No shelves, no counter, only ash in the shape of rectangles, receipt paper burned but never curled. Yet when they checked the security footage from nearby shops, the lights inside the store were still on, still humming, still flickering in perfect rhythm with the street lamps. The insurance company filed it as spontaneous electrical failure. The property was rebuilt into an apartment complex within the year, but the ground floor remained unleased. Every potential tenant pulled out before signing. They said the space felt too awake. The first occupant who dared to move in, a chain cafe, lasted 3 nights. Their manager quit without notice, leaving behind an envelope with no letter, only a blank receipt. The words "paid in full" appeared only when the paper caught the morning light. The landlord stopped advertising the space after that. He let it stay dark. But even in darkness, the faint whir of a refrigeration unit could be heard, steady and slow. And once, during maintenance, a worker swore he heard someone whisper from behind the wall. A man's voice, calm, polite, repeating the same sentence over and over. "Shift's over soon." He quit the next day. In the years that followed, the legend spread beyond Seoul. People on online forums began to share stories. A friend of a friend who bought a drink there once and found the bottle half empty when he got home. A tourist who took a photo of the storefront and later discovered a second door in the reflection, slightly open, with someone standing in it. A woman who used to live upstairs, who said she could hear the cash register dinging at 3 a.m., always in threes, and always followed by silence. No one could ever prove anything, but every time a witness tried to post photos, the images corrupted. Every time someone drew a map, the location blurred. Yet somehow people still found their way there, as if something beneath the city guided them, gently, like a magnet of unfinished intent. Some claim that those who entered the store alone at night never truly left empty-handed. They carried a fragment, something unseen but felt, a thought that wasn't theirs, a voice that echoed faintly when they paid for something elsewhere, the sensation that perhaps every transaction in the world was connected to one single ledger, written in invisible ink, and somewhere, someone, or something was keeping the books balanced. It is said that energy doesn't die, it merely shifts. That includes memories, promises, guilt, especially guilt. The rumor reached an old priest once who walked the streets of Samil-ro at dusk. He stood outside the now empty building, clutching his beads, and whispered a prayer. For the souls who worked too long, for the debts that refused to rest. And when he finished, he looked down to find a small slip of paper at his feet. It was blank at first, but as the street lights flickered on, faint words began to bloom across it, one by one. Paid in full. He smiled sadly. No, he said softly to the air. Not yet. He folded the receipt into his pocket and kept walking. And behind him, for the briefest moment, the lights in the empty windows blinked twice, as though in acknowledgement. They say if you walk that street after midnight, when the rain has just stopped and the smell of asphalt is thick in the air, you can hear a faint electronic hum, like a neon sign trying to wake up. And if you stop and listen long enough, you might catch a voice, barely above the static. Welcome. Would you like a bag? Some swear they've seen a faint green glow from the lowest window. Others claim that when they blink, it's gone. But those who know better, who've read the reporter's notes, or what little remains of them, understand the truth. The store isn't gone. It's just shifted, moved one layer deeper, to the space between memory and electricity, between ghost and signal, a perfect liminal zone where every unbalanced account still finds its match. Years later, an intern cleaning the archives of the old newspaper found a sealed folder labeled Samil-ro Incident. Inside, one photo, one receipt, and one sentence handwritten in faded ink. We are all clerks of something we can't see. No one remembered who wrote it. No byline. No date. Only that the paper smelled faintly of incense and rain. The intern placed it back, sealed it again, but when she turned to leave, she noticed the time on her phone. 2:43 a.m., and though the office was empty, she could swear she heard a faint sound. The soft click of a cash register drawer closing itself. And so the ledger continues, not in Seoul alone, but anywhere the hum of light never stops, in every gas station at 3 a.m., in every vending machine that eats your coin, in every flicker of neon that feels almost alive. Because the world is one endless transaction, give and take, memory and silence, debt and release. And somewhere, always somewhere, someone is still pressing the button.